fully submerged under thick ice-cold water and still conscious. The skier's body temperature had dropped to a record low of just 57 degrees Fahrenheit. She had no chance of survival until, suddenly, her heart began to beat again. In this video, I'll share 8 incredible survival stories that are almost impossible to believe. But be warned, some moments may shock you. Let's start with British skydiving instructor Michael Holmes. By then, he already had over 7,000 jumps. In 2006, he was preparing for his 3rd jump of the day, this time filming a tandem skydive over Taupo, New Zealand. Before the flight, he checked his gear twice and his colleagues checked again. Everything looked perfect. At 15,000 feet, the skydivers jumped from the plane. Michael flew around the tandem pair, capturing the best footage, and then pulled his chute. But instead of a smooth descent, he began to spin violently. His main parachute was tangled and useless. He cut it loose and reached for the reserve, but it failed too. The canopy never opened. Holmes tried cutting the lines with a knife, but the spinning kept him from lifting his arms. A quick glance at his altimeter told him the truth. This was the end. 6 seconds later, he slammed into the ground. A friend who landed nearby saw the impossible. Michael was alive. He had fallen onto a blackberry bush and was still conscious. At the hospital, doctors found broken ribs, a shattered foot and ankle, and a punctured lung. They told him straight, if he had hit hard ground or water, he would have been dead. Pure chance had saved his life. But what if you fall into a volcano? There, no bush is going to save you. In November 1992, cameraman Michael Benson and Duddy flew to film Hawaii's Pu'u Ō'ō Volcano. Their pilot was Craig Hosking, one of Hollywood's best. As the helicopter approached the crater, it suddenly lost altitude and began to fall. Everyone on board thought it was over. But a miracle happened. The helicopter didn't crash into molten lava, it landed on solid rock. The passengers suffered only minor injuries. And another stroke of luck. The crash site was right next to a pocket of fresh air. Anywhere else, they would have been instantly suffocated by toxic gas. But surviving the crash was only half the battle. Escaping the crater was something else entirely. Red-hot rock crumbled at the slightest touch, burning their hands and feet. Big steam and smoke made it impossible to see. The men lost each other in the chaos and wandered blindly. Hosking managed to return to the helicopter and radio for help. Rescuers airlifted him out the same day. But Benson and Duddy were left behind in the crater. They spent a night in terror, listening to molten lava rumble beneath them. The next morning, Duddy tried to climb higher. Benson stayed put. Hours later, he saw something fall toward the lava below. He was certain it was his friend's body, plunging to a fiery death. Now Michael was alone. No food, no sleep, cold rain pouring down. Somehow, he held on for 2 more days. When he could barely stand, a rescue net dropped from a helicopter above. On board, rescuers told him the truth. His friends were alive. The body he saw falling into lava was actually a supply package dropped from the air. Duddy had escaped the volcano after 27 hours of struggle. It proves once again, sometimes a chain of impossible coincidences is the only reason someone survives when physics has already passed its verdict. Now, a story from England, where an ordinary worker survived an accident that even the Terminator wouldn't withstand. Just before Christmas in 2008, Lowe was working at a factory in South Yorkshire. As he walked past an automated conveyor, his coveralls got caught in the machine. In an instant, he was dragged onto the belt and pulled into a gap only 12 inches wide. Within seconds, his body vanished inside the machine, leaving only his head sticking out the other side. He heard the sound of his own bones crunching and thought, "This is the end." The machine spat his broken body out the opposite side, but somehow he was still conscious. Only then did the pain hit with such force that he screamed. When his coworkers rushed in, they froze in horror. Lowe had a broken back in 2 places, crushed ribs, shattered pelvis and thighs, and severe internal injuries. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors told his partner to prepare for the worst. But against all odds, Matthew survived. He underwent 6 major surgeries and spent a month in the hospital. Doctors literally rebuilt his body. And a year and a half later, he was back at work, though in a different position. Today, the only reminders of his ordeal are weakness in his right arm and occasional panic attacks. His story is so unreal it could have been the plot of a science fiction movie. But the next case sounds even more unbelievable than fiction. On May 21st, 2011, in the small New Zealand town of Apatiki, experienced truck driver Stephen McCormick was doing routine maintenance. Standing between the cab and trailer, he slipped and fell. Instead of just hitting the ground, he suddenly felt his body inflate like a balloon, swelling to nearly twice its normal size. His coworkers and adult son came running to his screams. Stephen had fallen onto a brass valve from the truck's compressed air brake system. The valve pierced his buttock, forcing high-pressure air directly into his body. His coworkers shut off the air supply and laid him on the ground. But help didn't arrive quickly. Both ambulances in the district were already on calls. Stephen lay there in that horrific state for an entire hour before paramedics reached him. At the hospital, doctors discovered that the air had separated his fat from his muscles and filled the space inside his chest, abdomen, around his heart, lungs, even under the skin of his face. To help him breathe, they had to insert a tube between his ribs directly into his lung. The rest of the air had to escape naturally, a process that took 3 days. Afterward, Stephen walked out of the hospital completely healthy. The only mark left was a small puncture on his buttock. Doctors explained if the valve had entered just slightly differently, striking an artery or vein, he would have been dead in minutes. Pure chance saved his life. For Australian Neil Parker, survival came down to one choice: fight or give up. On Sunday morning, September 15, 2019, the 50-year-old set out on a short hike up Mount Nebo near Brisbane. An experienced bushwalker, he knew the trail well and carried only basic gear. That's why he didn't even think to tell anyone where he was going. An hour and a half into his hike, Parker was climbing near a waterfall. Suddenly, the rocks beneath him gave way and he fell. The 6-meter drop shattered his wrist and broke his leg. His phone slipped from his pocket and sank into the stream. No way to call for help. The only option: save himself. Neil built a splint from trekking poles and started crawling. Every meter was agony. He had to stop constantly to rest. He rationed food, saved his strength, and took painkillers. 2 days later, on Monday, coworkers noticed he hadn't shown up for work. Searches began. By Tuesday morning, a helicopter was finally in the air. From above, rescuers spotted a man waving a bright object. Parker had crawled more than 2 miles from the fall site. He was airlifted to the hospital. Doctors called his improvised splint a true miracle of engineering. But sometimes, there isn't solid ground at all. 28-year-old James Grimes from the U.S. faced a similar nightmare in the open ocean. On November 23, 2019, he boarded a cruise from New Orleans to celebrate Thanksgiving. That evening, after a few cocktails, he went to the restroom. The next moment, he woke up in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Shock, panic, confusion. He had no memory of falling overboard. At first, he hoped someone would spot him quickly. But the night passed and no one came. Jellyfish stung his body. By morning, fear grew worse. A shark's fin appeared nearby. Something brushed his leg. James kicked and froze, waiting for the attack. But the predator disappeared as suddenly as it had come. On the horizon, he saw 2 ships and swam toward them for hours. To stay sane, he composed songs in his head for his 10-year-old daughter. The sun burned his skin. His strength drained away. 20 hours passed. When hope was almost gone, a rescue buoy splashed into the water near him. The waves kept tearing it from his hands. He couldn't hold on. Then, above him, appeared a Coast Guard helicopter. Rescuers lowered down and pulled him aboard. Later, one admitted, James had less than a minute of life left. Any longer, and hypothermia would have finished him. But even that wasn't the riskiest survival story. Imagine being trapped inside a storm at the cruising altitude of a jetliner and surviving. On February 14th, 2007, in Manila, Australia, world champion paraglider Eva Wisniewska prepared to defend her title once again. At first, the sky seemed calm, despite forecasts of a violent thunderstorm. But as soon as she took off, the clouds thickened. Flying under one of them, she suddenly felt an invisible force grab her paraglider. She was pulled upward at 65 feet per second, straight into the heart of the storm. At first, lightning flashed all around. Moments later, everything vanished into total darkness. A sudden drop in pressure knocked her out. She never felt the hail ripping her skin or the 50 below zero frost freezing her body solid. Her paraglider was lifted to over 32,000 feet, the cruising altitude of a jetliner. At that height, there is almost no oxygen. The human body begins to die, cell by cell. For Eva, it meant only one thing, death. But nearly an hour later, by some miracle, she regained consciousness. Her paraglider was already carrying her down, completely out of control. At one point, she was falling at 110 feet per second. But closer to the ground, shifting air currents slowed her descent. She landed 60 kilometers from her launch point, bruised, frostbitten, but alive. Her survival was compared to winning the lottery 10 times in a row. And yet, the most unbelievable story was still to come. Because Anna Holmes' return from the other side is something doctors still struggle to explain. May 1999, Norway. 29-year-old Swedish radiologist Anna Holmes was skiing with colleagues near Narvik. Her experience and knowledge of the trail couldn't prevent tragedy. She lost control, crashed, and smashed headfirst through 8 inches of ice into a frozen stream. Her entire body was trapped underwater. Only her skis and boots stuck out above the surface. Her friends rushed to help but couldn't pull her out. They called rescuers. In panic, Anna thrashed beneath the ice until she found an air pocket. She could breathe, and she stayed conscious for 40 minutes. Then she blacked out. Her colleagues no longer knew if she was alive or dead. Rescuers worked another 40 minutes before pulling her from the icy trap. By the time Anna reached the hospital, her body temperature had dropped to a record low 56.7 degrees Fahrenheit, the lowest ever recorded in medical history. Hours of resuscitation failed. But in Norway, there was one golden rule. No one is declared dead until the body is warm. Over 100 doctors and nurses worked in shifts, slowly trying to raise her temperature. And then, the impossible happened. Anna's pulse returned. It seemed like a miracle. But doctors didn't celebrate yet. She had been dead far too long. The brain usually suffers irreversible damage after just 20 minutes without oxygen. For the next 35 days, Anna remained on a ventilator. Then one day, she opened her eyes. Even more incredible, tests revealed no brain damage at all. But there was no reason to celebrate just yet. Below the neck, she was still paralyzed. At 29, she was devastated. Horrified at the thought of spending her life in bed, even angry that she had been saved. But after another month of intensive therapy and rehabilitation, Anna Holmes walked again. Her story is unique. Most victims of severe hypothermia never survive, even if their hearts are restarted. But Anna's case became a true medical miracle. I've told you many such stories already. And it raises one question. Can all of this really be explained by coincidence alone?